Hi, and welcome to this live reading of Shameless Book 2 in the Orphan Saga, written by Sherry A. Burton, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Magnifying glass in one hand and flashlight in the other, Cindy inched her way across the attic floor. While the attic had overhead lighting, the beam of the flashlight helped to illuminate smaller search areas. Linda was on the opposite side of the room, mirroring her actions. We've covered every inch of the floor at least a dozen times. Maybe they're not here. Cindy had a sinking feeling her mother might be right. The X that marked the spot where they'd found her grandmother's journals was the only one they'd found. Then why send us on a wild goose chase? You read the letter. It said the other journals are hidden in the attic. Linda switched off her light and rubbed at her knees. Maybe she dreamt it. She was getting on in years. Cindy laughed. Not likely. That woman had the mind of an owl. I don't think she ever forgot anything. Well, if it's all the same to you, I'm going to go down and start a load of laundry and figure out something for lunch, Linda said as she stood. Go ahead. I want to finish this section before I give up. The guys are coming to move the contents of the storage unit back up here on Friday. I just need to make sure I'm not missing anything before we cover the floors. Linda shook her head, and I don't know why the woman didn't leave everything up here in the first place. Why go to the bother of having everything put in the unit if she knew you would bring it all back? I don't think she knew. Besides, if she would have left it up here, I might not have found the clues that led me to her journals. Look how long it took me to decide to go through the storage unit. And we both know I only did that so I could stop paying rent on the thing. Where would the incentive have come from to go up in the attic and sort through things, especially at this time of the year? And you know I don't have time during the winter months with school and all. You have a point there. Let me know if you find anything. Cindy continued to army crawl across the floor, shining her light and looking for the elusive X's. Grandma Mildred was adamant that strangers not read the journals. She held the magnifying glass closer to the floor, thinking maybe Grandpa Howard had purposefully made them smaller so that no one would stumble upon them by mistake. Her heart skipped a beat as the beam of light caught a mar in the wood. She sighed. Not an X, but a small half-moon nick. An obvious flaw in the wood that she'd seen at least a dozen times before. Cindy reached the wall and sighed her frustration. Linda was right. There were no X's, no clues, and certainly no journals to be found. While she knew she should be happy with the sheer fact of finding her grandmother's journals, now that she'd gotten to know the other children, she was genuinely interested in how things had turned out for each of them. With one final glance over her shoulder, she descended the attic stairs and lifted them back into their resting place within the rafters of the ceiling. You look like a kid who struck out at home plate and lost the game, Linda said when Cindy entered the kitchen. Yeah, well, I kind of feel like a kid who went looking for hidden Christmas presents only to find a lump of coal. Only I didn't even find that. I think you need to find a bar of soap, Linda said when Cindy reached into the cabinet to get a glass. Cindy sniffed at her armpits and grimaced. Sorry, it's hot as Hades up there. Tell me about it. Who needs a gym membership? Just spend time in the attic and save a few dollars. Not doing either. Reading is my cardio. I just wish we would have found something to read. Are you going back up? Linda asked, filling Cindy's glass with fresh lemonade. No. I've had enough fun crawling around in the heat for today. I'm going to jump in the shower. Speaking of shower, that window seems to be leaking again. Why Howard insisted on having that little crescent window installed in that shower right after they moved in is beyond me. It doesn't even serve a purpose. I don't know. I guess it looks good from the street. I'll make some calls after I get out of the shower. It's not like it lets in much light, Linda said as she was leaving the room. Cindy reached into the shower and turned on the water, eyeing the window as she did. Linda was right. The window didn't make sense. Why put in a half-moon window when a full moon would have added so much more light? It was the same as the north-facing window in the garden shed. What was it with Grandpa Howard and half-moons? Cindy reached to turn the water off, a flicker of hope rising over her like a child who just found the answer to a long-dwelled-upon math problem. "Mom, could you please come in here?" she called, trying unsuccessfully to keep her voice even. Linda was there in an instant. "What is it?" Cindy pointed at the window. "Maybe we were looking for the wrong clue." The little half-moon marks in the wood looked more intentional once they knew what to look for. Using the new clues, they'd uncovered 16 wooden cases hidden in the recesses of both walls and floor, each mirroring the one that held Mildred's journals, including those from Grandpa Patty Howard and Uncle Frank. Each box had both a number and name burned into the polished wood on the top, and all securely locked. The names coincided with the children Grandma Mildred had mentioned in her journal burned into the polished wood, all but one, which simply had the number 18. They tried the key belonging to Mildred's case to no avail. They were still looking for both the keys and the box with Tobias's name, since Mildred had specifically mentioned it in her journal. Linda patted the stack of wooden boxes that protected each set of journals. "Given the animosity between Tobias and Howard, I wouldn't be surprised if your grandfather didn't toss his in the trash. I have to admit to having the same thought, but I'm not ready to give up just yet," Cindy said, moving to the other side of the room. "What are you looking over there for? We found all the others over here," Linda said, wiping the sweat from her brow. "That's precisely why I'm looking over here. You said it yourself. Grandpa didn't like Tobias. Plus, think about it. Grandma has mentioned more than once that Tobias was not part of Mary's little gang. He was an outsider. So maybe Grandpa wanted to treat him like one. I never knew Howard to be one to hold a grudge, but it makes sense that he would want to keep Tobias away from Mildred, even in death," Linda said, joining her. "Can you blame him? I mean, the man drained the love right out of the woman. Took everything she had and left her with nothing to give to Grandpa," Cindy said sourly. Linda turned from the wall she was searching. "Or you." Cindy shrugged. "He led her into a life few could recover from." "True, but what if he said were true? If they had sent Mildred back on the trains, you would not be here. Tobias's death created the domino effect that followed." Cindy wiped the sweat from her face. "You see what is happening here, don't you?" Linda's brow wrinkled. "See what?" "The total role reversal. You standing up for Mildred. I never saw that coming." Linda's frown increased. "Huh, imagine that. The old girl's probably turning over in her grave right now." Cindy laughed. "You're probably right." Linda looked up at the ceiling. "Yo, Millie, since we seem to have found some common ground, how about giving us a hand finding that last journal? Oh, and while you're at it, how about some keys so we don't have to trash Howard's handiwork by sawing open the boxes?" Both women looked around as if they actually expected something to happen. "Which," Linda said when nothing did. Cindy laughed and lowered to the floor. She got onto her knees, flashlight and magnifying glass in hand. "Keep looking for anything out of the ordinary." Linda turned her attention back to the wall she'd been searching. "Like?" "Anything. Grandma Mildred's box was under an X. Everyone else's was covered by a sliver of moon. If Howard wanted Tobias to be left out, he would have marked his spot by something different. Anything out of the ordinary. Like a mouse paw?" Linda said, cutting her off. "This has to be it." Cindy pushed to her feet, hurried to where her mother stood, and peered through the magnifying glass. Sure enough, a tiny rodent footprint was carved into the wood just below where the wall met the ceiling. Cindy traced a finger over the tiny print. He sure didn't want that one found, did he? If Mildred hadn't mentioned it, I don't think we would have thought to look. Cindy retrieved the cordless screwdriver and loosened the screws that held the planks in place. It makes sense now, Linda muttered with a flourish of the hands. What does? The way this attic is pieced together. Howard never asked for help when he was doing the planking up here. Given Howard was a master carpenter, your father was appalled when he first saw how his father had spliced the room together. Nothing, including the flooring, lined up. Howard had used every piece of scrap wood he could find, insisting he was too cheap to buy new boards for a room no one would ever see. Your father actually lost sleep over it, thinking his dad was suffering some kind of dementia or something. It turns out the man had more forethought than any of us put together. Look at how he was able to hide all the journals so that none of us had a clue. I've got it, Cindy said, removing the final board. She dislodged the box, carefully pulling it from its hiding place. There was no name on the box. However, when she turned it over, she saw the wood was etched with a small, perfectly carved mouse. Above the mouse was the number 2. At least Howard didn't carve out a rat, Linda said, peering over her shoulder. This is true, Cindy agreed. She handed the box to Linda, picked up a plank, and returned it to the wall as she had done with each board they had removed thus far, marking each hiding spot with an X in white chalk. It was Cindy's idea, adding that she planned to take photos so she could share with her classroom during a history project she was forming in her head. It would be a fun way to tell the children about the orphan drains. She returned all the planks but one when she sighed. I think I'm going to be sick. Heat stroke? Linda's voice was full of concern. Worse. Cindy turned the board so that her mother could see the key mounted to the back of the plank. We are going to have to unscrew every board we have returned today just to find the rest of the keys. Linda's face went white. I don't think I have it in me today. Cindy studied her mom for a moment. Over the last week since finding the initial journals, Linda's color had returned, and there was a sparkle in her eyes Cindy had not seen since her father died. While Cindy herself had not yet experienced the kind of love her parents shared, she had felt an enormous loss as she watched the light slowly dim in her mother's eyes. For the first time since her father's passing, her mother had found something that excited her, and that something pulled her from the darkness Cindy was unable to reach. That in itself was the answer to a long-awaited prayer. That's okay, Mom. Now that I know where to look, it shouldn't take long. Linda smiled. That Howard was a real card, wasn't he? Cindy closed her eyes briefly. I can think of other things to call him right about now. Linda shot her a look. What would Uncle Frank have to say about that? Cindy sighed once more. He would warn me not to speak ill of the dead. Yes, but I think he'd also agree with you on this one. Linda picked up the box with the mouse, added a couple more to the pile, and started for the stairs. I'll take these down and come back for more. Hang on, I have a better idea, Cindy said, taking the stack from her mother. You go down to the bottom, and I'll hand them down to you. That way, neither of us has to carry them down the steep steps. Linda nodded. You always were the smart one in the family. I get it from my mother, Cindy replied. She waited for Linda to reach the bottom of the stairs and passed the journal boxes down one at a time. This should be the last one if I counted correctly, Linda said, reaching for the box. It is, Cindy said softly. Her mother's eyes went wide. You sound disappointed. Aren't you tired? Cindy laughed. Of course I am. This is the most I've exercised in years. It's just that in the scheme of things, this all seems so insignificant. From what I've read, there were over 250,000 children sent out on the orphan trains. Most schools didn't even cover this. We've got 18 journals. What happened to the other children? Who's going to tell their stories? Linda was quiet for a moment. What was that saying your Uncle Frank used to tell you when you got all stressed out about something? Cindy pictured Uncle Frank kneeling to her level, pushing the hair from her eyes, and when necessary, handing her a tissue to wipe the tears. He would ask me, "How do you eat an elephant?" Linda smiled. "And what was the answer?" Cindy returned her smile. "One bite at a time." "That's right. He always said not to get ahead of yourself, that things always have a way of working themselves out. You're the teacher in the family. Start with the journals we have and see where they take you. Sound like a plan?" "No, what?" Linda asked when Cindy shook her head. "No, you are the smart one in the family. Leave those there, and I'll move them when I'm finished." "Well, I am definitely smart enough not to argue with that. Hang on a sec," Linda said and disappeared from sight. She returned a few seconds later, reaching up to deliver a cold bottle of water. "I'm going to drum up something for dinner. If you need anything, stomp on the floor." "Mom?" "Yes?" "It's nice to have you back." Linda's eyes moistened. "It's good to be back."